Hi everyone, Ari Lewis here. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I have with me my guest Kevin Barry. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us. Can you tell the listeners out there a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. I'm a reporter at News 5 Cleveland, so that's the local ABC television affiliate. And so as a reporter there, I'm a general assignment reporter, so I report on everything from kind of day of news to then some other kind of niches that I've worked my way into, which is sometimes like use of space and like urban planning. So that gets into like a little bit of real estate and a little bit of like bike connectivity, different ways to use roads, different ways to use land. I've done a handful of medical marijuana coverage in our stories there. That's led me into then the hemp world as well. So just kind of completely separate and usually kind of unrelated topics. But that's where I end up focusing a lot of my time, kind of doing those things, because right now in Ohio and in Cleveland, I think both of those are super interesting with the way that the real estate market is in Cleveland, but then also Cleveland's Ohio rather, jumping into the medical marijuana and the hemp space, and all the benefits and problems that that's created. So that's kept me pretty busy for the last 2.5 years in Cleveland.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and I know we've interacted a bunch on different stories. I think one of the first questions that I'm sure many of our listeners are interested in. So it seems like you're a really busy guy covering a bunch of different stuff. You know, how does someone go about pitching you? You have a story idea, and I'm sure your inbox is getting inundated all the time with different pitches. What are the pitches where you're like, oh, this is really interesting. I'm going to follow up, and like, what are the pitches also where, oh, this is a completely red flag, like it's going in the garbage, not even opening it. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in order to get a journalist's attention, like you have to kind of understand what we're looking for. And so just to get into my headspace, when I'm pitching a story to my bosses and to my producers, because that's who has to give me the green light for me to go work on a story, it's about, not only what is the local impact, but also how does this fit into the larger trend. And so so I get probably 15 to 20 like PR pitch emails a day from like different marketing firms from all over the place. And the ones that catch my attention are the ones that identify, like a larger trend that's important overall, maybe across the country, and then are able to drill down into like Ohio specific or even like Northeast Ohio or like Cleveland specific data. So like, there's so like take the housing trend. How active are home buyers across the country, and then where does Ohio rank on that list? And from there, it's not that far of a jump then to drill into local realtors, and to see if that matches up. So if the premise of the pitch is more people are buying homes across the country, and then at Ohio, they're buying it at an even higher rate. Well, why is Ohio different than the rest of the country? Why are we ahead of that trend? Or on the flip side, why are we behind it? If the trend nationally is that more people are buying homes, but Ohio, actually fewer people are buying homes today than they were a year ago, why is that? And why is Ohio different? And so even just those kind of things, it doesn't have to be one way or the other, but just helping the journalists kind of understand where, or at least for me, since I'm local and I work in Cleveland, and that's kind of the part that we care about when we tell our stories, help me understand how it deals with the much larger trend that you're trying to push, and we're much more likely to engage. But also like it goes a lot into like reading the room and like understand what people care about right now. In the middle of the coronavirus, if you start getting pitches about something that's completely off topic and has nothing to do with healthcare, has nothing to do with medical, and even if it's medical, if it has nothing to do with the coronavirus, no journalist is gonna pay the time of day, because everybody is paying attention to what their local response to the coronavirus is. The flip side of that, though, is that if you're a place that's able to provide either experts on the coronavirus or experts on pandemics and things like that, then you're much more likely to get people to engage, just because it's on topic and it's what everybody is thinking of in the moment. Sometimes you just laugh an email out of your inbox when it's like comically off target and has nothing to do with what's going on, in the middle of a global pandemic. So
Would you mind, just giving me an example of like stuff that's happened recently where like, coronavirus, there's been, these protests, civil unrest, what are some of the ridiculous pitches that you've seen, if you
Yeah.
don't mind sharing?
Yeah, no, I mean, pitches for how to best care for your dog in the summer. Not a lot of people are paying much attention to, what the latest experts are saying about the best treats to give to your dogs or the best way to exercise your dogs in the summer. Everybody's at home. Everybody's walking their dog 4 times a day. There's not a lot of runway for a story like that when we're dealing with people who are looking for testing, people who are dealing with racial injustice. The a normal half-hour newscast, so 30 minutes of news from 6 to 6:30, normally only has about a 13-minute, we call it news hole, or a window for news between commercials, which are often 2 minutes per commercial with 3 commercial breaks, and then a bunch of time in there for weather, which is important locally. By the time you take all that stuff out, only about half of that time, maybe even less, is for news. And so when we have a global pandemic and racial unrest across the country, how to the best advice for how to care for Fido during the summer months just isn't going to make the cut. And that's something that I'd imagine really nobody would bite on. So
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. In terms of trends, as a reporter, how do you stay, I guess, proactive versus reactive about the trends? So like, something like coronavirus, is it where a bunch of you're hearing from experts because they're in your inbox and pitching you correctly, or is it like, oh, it's becoming mainstream and then you react to it? How do you guys, from both a pitching standpoint, know it's becoming a trend, or is it more like, oh, a bunch of pitches are coming into your inbox, so like you're reacting to it?
I, I think it's a mix of both. Most journalists don't want to be the kind of journalists who are doing the stories because there's a wave of pitches in their inbox, because chances are by that point you're already too late and other people have already done those stories and it's already made it through the point that it's coming out in like pitch emails. So what journalists try to do is, and like this is where Twitter has kind of a niche audience, but I think Twitter's valuable because if you're active enough on it and you follow the right people, you really can kind of sort of I guess identify some trends before they go much more mainstream, because it can be a cesspool for some people, but if you kind of figure out your followers and follow the right people, you can see trends start to develop. I feel like people kind of put their thoughts on Twitter first, maybe at the beginning, or it's their hot takes that are going on Twitter. And that can if you're following the smart people, that can lead you to where the next trend is going. But most journalists are going to want to do stories on the trend, like on the beginning of the bell curve, right? So like on the early adopter part of what the overall understanding of like a topic's going to be. And that generally comes through like relationships. And so it comes through just like informal, knowing who the people in the know are and checking in with them every so often, and bouncing stuff off them, and every so often just jumping on the phone and saying, hey, like, I've kind of heard about this. What are you hearing? What's kind of interesting in your sphere that, not many people know about? And I think everybody, no matter what industry they work in, for me, whether it's like real estate or into like the medical marijuana, like everybody has one or two things that are bopping around that they know is like coming down the pike that not many other people know about. I'm not talking about like state secrets, but just like, starting to see ways that their own industry is changing. And I think good journalists are good at finding people who can identify those for them and help them along the way kind of figure it out. And so like a lot of journalists say it feels like you're kind of feeling around in the dark when you're doing journalism, because you don't really know what you're looking for. You don't know what you're going to find. And, for the most part, we're not subject matter experts. And so we need experts to help us guide us through whatever we're doing stories on. So take it to the coronavirus. We need medical experts to tell us what's important and what's not important. And so, we can feel around in the dark, but we need a doctor to kind of bring us to whatever the answer is, and whatever the next trend is going to be. And that's what we want to do the stories on. And so I think a lot of it is cultivating those kind of relationships.
That makes a lot of sense. And, I guess to follow up, two questions is, what are some of the best ways folks who are looking to pitch stories can interact with you on Twitter to get noticed? so that you're like, oh, this is a really interesting person and that I might want to interview you, or this is interesting. How do people catch your attention?
Yeah, I think quoting or I guess follow. Well, not only following me, but also direct messaging and like adding tweets onto other stories that I do that are similar in their field. So like, and this has happened before where I've pushed a medical marijuana story, and someone would say, "Hey, I just saw your tweet on this. I also work in the field, and I can be a resource down the line." Or
By the way, I think I did that.
you're right, that was you. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, exactly. Wow. Oh, with this
I
conversation.
think that's how I
Yeah.
connected with you.
I had no idea. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So like that was great because I did that story because that's kind of my area. And you're like, hey, I'm someone who can be a resource in the future. Here's my information. Let's connect and talk. But also like in the real estate sphere, if I start pushing a lot of like I have a story that's airing today about like a big factory in Cleveland that's getting turned into mixed use. And all I didn't really tag many people outside of the folks who I talked to for the story, but I noticed that other people who either work in that area or who live in that area or whose job it is to make that area better, I'm seeing like the story kind of regenerate on their social media feeds and things like that. And so those kind of people, I know that they're interested in my work. And so next time I'm doing a story in that area, and there's definitely going to be a next time, they may be the people who I reach out to get some insight about why that area needs help, how that area is going to be better, and how whatever project I'm working on next time is going to benefit that spot because they've showed interest in what I've already published. And so, so that's where when I'm sitting down and trying to figure out, okay, we're working on a story for this, who are the people I can call, who are the experts I can, kind of get their perspective on, who would other people care to hear from for this story? Those people come in front of mine because I know they interacted with the story I published before.
And is that like a formal list of like, on an Excel spreadsheet? Oh, here are all my medical, cannabis folks, or is it just like top of mind awareness of, oh, I think I've interacted with this guy a couple times on Twitter, he comes to mind.
Yeah, no, it's a little bit of both. And it depends on the person. I love Excel spreadsheets, or, like I don't have Excel on my laptop, but I have like Notepad. And so I have notepads of contacts that I can reach out to. And especially because like, so I say like a medical marijuana lawyer, if one's not available one day, I may have to call another one in order to get a story done that I need to get done on deadline. And so the more contacts I have, the easier it's going to be for me to do the stories I need to do. But then also the wider your net is and the more places information comes in from. Not everybody in an industry knows about everything that's going on industry-wide. And so having multiple points of contact help a lot. Just to get a better understanding. Or somebody may come to you with a nugget of information and you run it by somebody else and they say, yeah, like I understand that other people are excited about it. I don't really think it's a big deal. That can be informative too. So yeah, I mean, it depends on the person. I try to cultivate all those things because I know I don't have a great memory. Like I'm not going to be able to just remember names and faces off the top of my head. And so I need to keep that stuff in a list so that when I go back, I know who to reach out to.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I know before we started recording, you talked about the Cleveland Clinic as a great example of doing media outreach. Can you just talk a bit about why are they so good at what they do, and sort of tips that other organizations might take to sort of copy their approach?
Yeah. So and actually it's the Cleveland Clinic and university hospitals, honestly, both do a good job in sort of different ways. And so the Cleveland Clinic, like we were talking about before, created a Twitter account specifically for media members. And so it's not necessarily one that they like push out their Cleveland Clinic news on, but when a big event happens, so like I was talking about before, like being relevant and having experts about something that's top of mind in the moment, God forbid a celebrity passes away of a specific kind of illness or cancer or disease, very often they'll reach out, that day, as soon as that news breaks and say, hey, we have Dr. So-and-so who's an expert in exactly this kind of thing that we know is making headlines today. That person's available for interviews if you guys care to talk to them. And maybe we'll talk to them, maybe we won't. But a lot of times just knowing that that's an option on the table, we'll at least go do the interview. And then once we do the interview, chances are it ends up on TV, just because it's there and it's accessible and it's relevant. And so, if they were to say, we have Dr. So-and-so who's an expert on a random kind of medicine that has no relevancy to the day's news, nobody's going to bite on that. But when they know what's going to be relevant that day and they're able to provide an expert for that, then that works out great. Over at university hospitals, they do some similar stuff. They have also a wide range of folks, but like they have a great television studio. And so we've talked to a lot of their doctors in this television studio that's already lit, so that it looks really nice. It has a nice backdrop. It's already set up for audio. So we can just roll in, set our camera down, and it's a lot easier because like we don't have to light the room ourselves and things like that. So, I mean, those are two massive organizations. They have a lot of former TV people working in their like media departments, but those are like really simple ways that they're just able to cut down on the time it takes as a journalist to get the expert we need to talk to and to get them on our air. They've kind of found a way to almost hack that system to make it that much faster.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear, and hopefully people listening will take a few tips from that. I think one of the other thing that's sort of topical and top of mind is the evolution of journalism. I think as of late, in that how do you combine quality journalism but also make sure that it gets attention. I know one of the things you talked about is like it's not necessarily a journalist's job to go viral, but I think there's also a distinction between like top tier journalism and sort of the BuzzFeeds of the world, where some of the BuzzFeed journalists are doing hard hitting journalism, but then some of it's like why did Kim Kardashian wear this purple dress and what it means for relationships, like
Right.
Probably gets clicks, but is that really hard hitting stuff?
Well, no, and so like one of my colleagues, Homa Bash, has like 10,000, not an exaggeration, Twitter followers. And I mean, and that's a buku crazy number for most people, but especially for like local journalists. And she's been really good. She does not only amazing journalism, but she's also really good at just sharing stuff that matters. And so, the buzzword around it is kind of like authenticity, like tweet about things you like and tweet about things you know about. So like she enjoys certain kinds of food, and so she tweets about that, and she'll tweet pictures of her dog and her husband who does woodworking and things like that. So she lets people into her life, and she's enjoyable to follow. So then people follow her for that stuff. And then when she does a great piece of journalism and she tweets that out, that gets in front of all their eyes as well. And so like I was talking about before, like I did a story that I knew would resonate with like certain pockets of Twitter, and I could see it passing around there. She's widened that out so much because she's been able to pull in so many followers for just a wide range of reasons. And so people enjoy seeing her and her dog, and they also enjoy seeing her on TV. And so then they watch her journalism too. Like as a journalist, we're not very useful on social media if all we ever do is tweet out our journalism, because chances are people aren't always going to click on it. Like they want to follow us for some of the like behind the scenes stuff. Like what does Kevin do on vacation? What does Kevin do around his house? And so if you let them in a little bit for that kind of stuff, they'll follow you, and you create this kind of like social media friendship with people. And then when you tweet out a piece of journalism that they may not have looked at otherwise, they may just watch it just to check up on you and just to see the kind of work you're doing. And if that's what it takes to get people in front of, what we're actually paid to do and what our kind of role as the fourth estate is, if the price to get people in front of that is, I tweet out some yard work and some pictures of that, like that's not too high a price to pay. I think the difference is like, I don't think journalists should be going around, spouting their personal views on things, or, doing like TikTok dances to go viral and and all that stuff. And people do that. Like that's their vibe, that's never going to be me. And I think for most like serious journalists, that's not going to be them either. But that's the kind of thing that gets likes and follows and gets retweets and gets people to go viral. And I think that's the trap that like journalists get into, is that, I envy somebody who has a few thousand followers. I have, I'm coming up on 1,200 myself. I'm a little shy of that. which is like a little embarrassing. Like I'm a little self-conscious about it. So like I envy other people who have larger followings, but it's what are you willing to do to get there? And I think, the best thing you can take is do everything you're comfortable doing, but don't do things that hurt your credibility, because then people won't come to you for the journalism, if they don't think you're serious.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of a good, note to end on as a last question. And I've written about this. I've had guests talk about it. There's this evolution, I think, occurring where, and maybe this is more pertinent in the newspaper industry than it is in TV news, but the writer is sort of getting unbundled from the newspaper, and it's much more about the individual brand than it is about, I work for the local ABC affiliate, right? Do you see that happening, in local journalism and national journalism and everything in between, where that individual brand is becoming more important? Do you think they're still tied together in many ways? What are your thoughts on sort of that distinction and that separation on identity?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. And I think it's because social media lets us get so much closer to the people who are doing the news, right? So like once upon a time, the only time to see Walter Cronkite was, at 6 o'clock at night when he's showing on the air. You couldn't tweet at him during the day. He certainly wasn't going to tweet back. So like that was the only time. So Walter Cronkite was tied to the network because the only time to see him was on network time. I think now, because of social media, people can send me direct messages, and I'm not calling myself Walter Cronkite. You can send the Walter Cronkites of today messages directly, but also like you can see me go do a story and you can tweet me directly, and I'll always answer. I don't have so many followers that I can't get back to people who tweet at me. And so like I'll engage people on stories, and sometimes they think it's not a good story. Sometimes they think it's a good story. But that's a level of interaction that never existed, before social media. And so I think that's why the individual brand is becoming so much more important now, and it's existing at all, is because there is that access between Joe Q Public, who's watching on TV or watching us on Facebook or seeing the stuff I tweet out on Twitter, and the person who's creating it. And I don't think it's a matter of like, is it good or is it bad? It's the reality of the day. And I think people who are successful at cultivating that personal brand and doing that in a way that's responsible and maintains their credibility, but then also pushes it back to like cultivate that for the sake of bringing people to the work. And the capital J journalism and holding power accountable and things like that. I think those are the people who really monopolize on it the most. Because they get the followers for, all the personal reasons. And then they bring them to, hey, by the way, we're working on this really great story about your community. You should watch it because there's important information here that you should know about the place that you're living in.
Yeah, and I think, sort of as an ending note, that's such a good point of like, how the two interact, the individual and the media organization. And if used correctly, right, it's a good way for better journalism to occur, because you're meeting people pitching you that you might not have been able to pitch. You find stories that you might not have seen, but it's also a way for, maybe something that doesn't make the 13 minutes, but that is still, important, that you can tell people, and then they can also learn more about you. And there's that authenticity that's happening. But Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. Can you just, tell people if they want to reach you or where to follow you, where you're at?
Yeah. So you can find my Twitter handle is Kevin Barry TV. And then I'm on Facebook too, just as Kevin Barry, WEWS, WEWS. And then you can follow us on Facebook at News 5 Cleveland. And our website is news5cleveland.com, and the station Twitter handle is at WEWS.
Thank you so much again, Kevin, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I appreciate it too.